Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good, all 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is Taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live, must start and file in app by 2/18.
You're listening to the Reversing Climate Change podcast by the team at NORI, the carbon removal marketplace. This is a show about the innovators and entrepreneurs developing solutions to climate change.
Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm one of the co-founders of the NORI carbon removal marketplace and the head of creative and marketing here. Today, I have with me Paul Hawken, author of many books, including Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, and his latest, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. Thanks for being on the show, Paul.
Total pleasure. Thank you so much, Ross.
I'm so happy to have you here. I got to see you speak at TED Countdown in Detroit, which was quite an event. And Drawdown was one of the first books, it might even be the first book that I read when I got into climate as a professional. And it really shaped quite a lot about how I think. It was a great anthological view of all of the solutions available, or many of them, for those who care about climate change and how to address it. And then Regeneration, your newest book, it has a similar kind of overview, anthology-esque approach to the myriad solutions that are being developed right now. I see a lot of continuity between these two works, but also a lot of differences. How do you conceptualize your choosing to write another enormous book on a very similar topic?
A good question. Well, Drawdown emerged actually as an idea in 2001, not the title, not the book itself, but in 2001, after the third assessment from the IPCC came out, it became blaringly obvious, and glaringly, I should say, but that people didn't know what to do, and that there was really no place where people could go and research or read or understand what the solutions were. Second of all, there was nobody naming the goal. And I just felt then and now, actually, people still don't name the goal. Net zero is not a goal. I mean, it'd be like if I'm going from here to New York and I get to the Continental Divide and say, hey, I'm here. No, you're not. It's just a threshold. So net zero is a threshold, decarbonization, not a goal. I mean, that's a process, for sure. And even we can talk about carbon removal, not a good goal. Okay. So I want to name the goal, which is to reverse global warming. Can we just, put that stake in the ground so we have that expansive sense of what we want to do as a civilization? Second, I asked NGOs, universities, friends at universities and institutes, to basically map, measure, and model the most 100 substantive solutions to reversing global warming. So is the goal reversing and the solutions. And for 2-3 years, I did that and mentioned it, and people said, great idea, we don't do that, or, things like that. And nobody wanted to do it. And so in 2013, I read Bill McKibben's piece, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. I think that was in Rolling Stone. And what he'd done is Mark Campanale, who has Carbon Tracker in London, had basically analyzed the balance sheets of every coal, gas, and oil company in the world, and said basically those assets, their reserves couldn't be assets, because if they burned, we would be basically Venus. So, how could they be assets? What Bill did in his piece in Rolling Stone is set a match to the assets. And it was terrifying. It was global warming. It was terrifying new math, And I had people coming up to me, Ross, and who said it's game over. And I'm going to move to British Columbia, take the kids. I mean, like, it's over. We're done. We failed.
I told that to you. Is that who?
Yeah. And so I just felt like, wow. When sometimes, I've never been an alcoholic or addict. But I know people who've been in, AA, and actually one of the hallmarks of that is to give up, to surrender, to, say, look at, hello, my name is Paul, I'm an alcoholic or whatever. But I felt like when you give up on something, that actually is an opening as opposed to a closure. And I thought that, so I saw it as an opening for Drawdown and decided to do it myself. Now I say myself, actually there's dozens and dozens of people, but to initiate it. And I didn't know how to do it very clearly, but just gathered people, Amanda Ravenhill and Chad Frischman and Zeke Housefather and then 66 different researchers from all over the world, all 6 continents except Antarctica, and who were postdocs or, PhDs or whatever. And we started making a list of the solutions, and we had a hat in the office. Like, I think we put, we think of a solution, paper cup to Starbucks, put it in, but just whatever it was, and then we started to go through it and winnow it into what were substantive solutions. And again, the idea was to map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And away we went. When we got down to about 100 or so, we started to model them. Probably had the biggest, we were, broke. We had the biggest Excel spreadsheet in the world that, if you just whispered at it, it would break down completely and have to restart it. I mean, it's just huge models, and I give Chad Fishman a whole lot of credit for those models. And out it came. But I knew as a writer, as an author, that when you do a book, you have to stay in your lane. If you're going to write, a bodice ripper, book, you don't talk about philosophy. And so in this one,
the time is Bodice Ripper coming out though? You're at home, you're not traveling a lot. Are you gonna write that?
I'll get to that. But the point being is that these are the most substantive solutions, but they're global. And they didn't take in social justice. They didn't take into account culture. They didn't take into account gender. They didn't take into account, colonization. They didn't take into account so many other things, And furthermore, there's no such thing as a global solution because there's no global. They're all local. Causes are local, and so are the cures. And so I knew that. And the reason I always knew before it was even not just completed, Drawdown as writing, I knew I was going to do Regeneration, that it was the sequel. Because really, if you're not talking about the biosphere and regenerating what has been lost, and damaged, whether it's land or rivers or whether it's desert, desertification, deserts, and certainly farms or, industrial agriculture, then you're not serious, because then and now there is what's called the climate tunnel syndrome, which is basically the idea that somehow if we get the carbon thing right, that we're good to go and we get a hall pass to the 22nd century. It's like, no, you don't. And please do it. And we need to do it. No question. It's just imperative. But so regeneration was really sort of stepping back and looking at it from a broader perspective, which is how to bring back life. In other words, if you're not creating an increasing amount of life on Earth, then what are you doing? What are you doing? Because there's no middle ground. There's no neutral ground there where you can say, I'm not creating more life, but I'm not taking more life. Yes, you are. And so that applies, of course, to agriculture specifically, profoundly. But in all other human endeavors, that applies. And so that was why regeneration was always in my mind as the sequel.
It's such a heavy cognitive load to transform everything about your life. If you're in a difficult marriage and you think there's one key thing stopping you from having a healthy marriage, that seems achievable. If that's you need to change your entire personality and how you relate and everything else, that actually probably is what you need to do to fix the marriage. But it's a much more daunting step. I imagine just focusing on the carbon math is a simple story. It's misleading in many ways too, because there are several overlapping ecological crises happening, concurrently. But you think that's actually going to mislead us, or maybe it already has misled us?
Yeah, it's created what that's called the carbon tunnel syndrome, which is this narrow focus. You see that especially in the tech industry. The idea that tech is the savior, that now we have AI and tech, we're going to fix it, and the very verb is wrong. Fix. You don't fix nature. you create the conditions for regeneration. You don't come in, the idea that humankind, sort of understands better than the living world, is kind of a vanity that has brought us to this point. And which is we've been taking, extractive economy, everybody knows that. But the fact is that we've lost half of all life on the planet, biomass life in all forms, in the last 200 years. And the rate is increasing right now. And so that's what I'm saying. You can look at, 2050 projections, IEA, this, that, World Bank. We can get, net zero by 2050 if we do X, Y, Z. Good. Now, do a 180 and look at our forests, our lands, our waters, our oceans, our people, human health, poverty, inequity, injustice. Look at our megaforests, all 5 of them. Look what happened to the boreal forest this year, in Canada. That's a regime shift. That's not a fire. So unless we have a more expansive view, expansive meaning holistic, that is to say the whole tamale, which is called planet Earth, I feel like we get into these things like direct air capture, like, okay, it's a very male thing, with all due respect to our gender, to think that, oh, we'll fix this. And then, how you have Occidental Petroleum announcing, last week, was it, or whatever it was, that they're going to build, the first $1 billion direct air capture plant in Ector County, Texas, that will sequester or remove, as some people say, but 500,000, tons of CO2 per year at a cost of $300 million per year operating costs, which is, you have to think about 1 billion capital costs, 300 million operating costs, 500,000 tons, which is 360 seconds of global emission. 360 seconds of global emissions for $1 billion. And you just think, like, what $1 billion would do for so many aspects of the living world, or for poverty, or for equity, or for for forests, for the mega forests, it's mind-boggling that there's this allocation of capital, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon because it's like, people think, oh, it's going to happen, it's going to make money. These companies are, going up in value, the direct air capture companies and so forth. And to me, it's just absolutely ludicrous.
I was so interested to hear you say this, because regeneration, I don't think, mentions much about industrial carbon removal until there's an appendix where I think you mentioned something very similar to what you just said. Whereas when I compare that with Drawdown had a much more ecumenical focus, where tech did have a clear role to play. And some of this could be quite helpful in conjunction with more natural climate solutions. It seems that you've soured on that over time, or maybe I misread your original book here. But what happened in the past couple of years that caused you to revise this thought?
There's nothing wrong with technology per se, but when technology starts to breathe its own exhaust, there is something wrong with it, which is to think that somehow it's going to do something. The fact is that we don't want to remove carbon. We want to change the flow of carbon. So just the fact that people using the term removal, like removing from what? That means the atmosphere is different than the biosphere, which is absolutely not true. They're one thing. Just like you have gas in your lungs, right? It's a gaseous thing, and you have, and you have in your material. Okay, so the Earth has, a gaseous expression, 15 miles at the most. I mean, in terms of functionally protective of the Earth, and then we have the planet itself, in terms of living matter and geology and water. Okay, so just that idea that we're going to remove it others the climate, and that the whole the language around it, like we're going to fix climate, we have, we're going to fight climate, we have to fight climate change. All those terms are the language that have basically emblematic of how the mindset of othering people, cultures, place, nature, the world, which is the hallmark of Western deterministic science, has brought us to this situation we're in today. And so to use that same mindset of othering is the cause, it's not the cure. And that's it's not the technique, which is technology. It's not that technology is thing. It's like, to what end? To what end? Is it synchronous? Is it harmonious, to the living world? Or is it mind over? Is it trying to dominate? Is it trying to fix, in this case, and so forth? And that's where it goes wrong.
Mhm. There's actually a lot of terminological back and forth within the carbon removal community. Many think that more temporary carbon storage should not qualify as true removal because it's in the fast carbon cycle and it's going through soil and forest and going back to the atmosphere or oceans in a pretty quick cycle. But a lot of people think that carbon removal should refer to lithospheric storage, where it's going back in a similar sink as it emitted from. So fossil emissions should go back into the lithosphere in probably the same reserve spot that it came out of. And I think removal in that case is probably an appropriate term. Do you disagree with that?
It's appropriate in terms of the function, but it's inappropriate in terms of understanding the flow of carbon,
Hmm.
which is that, and furthermore, like even at the DAX best case of $200 a ton, just removing last year's carbon, 2022, would cost the world $5 trillion. Okay. So again, you think, okay, 5 trillion, what could we do with $5 trillion, given all the other modalities, And the idea that somehow the carbon cycle, which you referred to, is not adequate to the task at hand, I would argue against that one too. The carbon cycle is supposed to be a cycle. And my new book is called Carbon, the Book of Life, but it's all about the flow of carbon. And that's what we have to look at. And yes, have we subverted, diverted? Have we definitely, by, burning fossil fuels and so forth, old trees and animals, and rapidly changed, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere? Of course, that's known. But I'm just trying to get back to the language here, Ross, and that is that we are at a crisis of, I would just say, I just don't think very, very few people understand the enormity of the crisis that we're in right now. And it's okay. Maybe it'd be a bad thing if they all knew at the same time. I'm not sure. But the fact is that less than 1% of people on the planet today doing anything at all whatsoever about climate. Okay. Less than 1%. It's so much less that it's just scary. Now, why? And that's really what I want to get to here, as opposed to parsing this technology versus that one. And the fact is, after 50 years of being in the public sphere, we have to ask ourselves, are 99.5% of the world stupid, insensitive, and don't care? Or is the narrative that's been used by the climate movement right up until today absolutely causing that distancing and that, ignoring, and that, like, oh, I hope they figure it out because I don't know what to do and I don't have any role in this, and I don't even understand what they're talking about when they're talking about net zero and decarbonization and DAC and this and that. It doesn't mean anything to the vast majority of people in the world. And furthermore, the original rhetoric about current, future existential threat, that supposes it's a future existential threat to the world. Well, for sure, we can say today it's a current existential threat. But the fact is that at least 5 billion people wake up every single morning. It's probably more than that. And the first thing they think about is current existential threat. It's not about future existential threat. And so if the climate movement is talking about future threat and not seeing that actually climate solutions, the solutions that are in Drawdown, that are in Regeneration, and many other, proposals that exist right now, if we don't see that they absolutely address current existential threat, housing, food security, education, warmth, equity, that they do. And yet somehow the money that, is going to things that basically are concentrating capital in the world, as opposed to absolutely starting to, even carbon offsets is painful. You saw the Guardian piece, 87% of them are probably junk, not just, not, I mean, junk means junk. I mean, it's like, and even worse than junk, they cause harm. Now, you could argue that one and say, well, that was just this one, study and not that study. That's one NGO and the Guardian altogether. But the point being is it's pretty much true. And so again, you have a $2 billion industry. Who's making the money? I mean, it's in the North. It's in concentrations of capital. It's, and the money is not going to the whole of the planet, to the global South, to the people who need it, the 5.1 billion people who wake up every morning with current existential threat. And the golden pathway to reversing global warming is to serve humanity. And you serve humanity by restoring, renewing, regenerating the biosphere on all levels.
How might we operationalize that and change the approach to offsetting? You have in the book phrase onsetting or term onsetting that you'd like to catch on. Is that how you might change the framing here?
Yeah, because offsetting is just a gerbil wheel.
Just a gerbil wheel.
That's all it is. It's like, I'm going to emit and then I'm going to buy an offset. Let's just say that offset was actually genuine. I mean,
Yeah.
even if temporal, okay, like 30 or 40 or whatever, okay, that's temporal, got that. But even were that to be the case, nothing's changed. And basically, it is a hall pass for polluters and for people who are exploiting the world and extracting more to keep going. And so onset means if, like when I fly, I do 5x. Now that's, I mean, just you get this thing like 56 kilograms. You buy a ticket. It says that's the jet A fuel carbon content that is emitted from takeoff to landing. That isn't. What about the plane? What about the people? What about the airport? What about the transport? What about the hotel? What about the highways? What about? It's a
No one would.
ridiculous number, and not only ridiculous, but as you know very well, I mean, these Delta and these things are buying offsets at $2 a ton or $3 a ton from God knows who and doing what. But and that's what I'm saying. When you commoditize or you monetize, when you that way, you're right back where you started, which is you're selling the earth to people. That's what you're doing, And it's like, can we just step back from that? And so I fly very rarely now. When I do 5X. That's an onset, which is, I have a lot of past emissions to make up for, and I'm not even sure 5X makes up for the emissions from a single flight. I'm not sure it does, really. So yeah, I mean, the offset world is just, it's crook in every way. Now, there's some amazing things going on there too, like with TNC and I forget what the organization is in Tanzania, I think Tanzania, and doing with Hazda lands there, which is pretty big. I think they're as big as half of England. I mean, it's a huge tract of land. And people Hazda tribes people who are actually illegally cutting logs and doing things, to support themselves are now basically wardens. They're guarding their land. And they're the last hunter-gathering culture in the world. And now they're protecting themselves. There's cultural pride. They're restored. That, to me, call it offset, onset, whatever you want to call it, that is really excellent. So I'm not just blanket the condemning onsets, but they're just very rare where they actually do what they set out to do.
We at Nori mostly work with farmers right now, trying to store soil carbon. Is there anything that you've seen in your long experience in the environmental movement and around voluntary carbon markets that might help us do things in a way that would be compatible with your thinking here?
Sure. I mean, my thinking is to make sure people understand that carbon is the metric, not the purpose.
Carbon is a metric,
Okay.
not the purpose. Okay.
The purpose of regenerative agriculture is to restore life to the soil. Carbon is obviously the measure of that. Life and carbon are, inseparable. All life forms are carbon-based. So you see things like indigo and ag and others and so forth, and now you're seeing Bayer, Monsanto, you're seeing Cargill, you're seeing Syngenta, you're seeing Corteva all get in to this idea of regenerative ag with this very, very small singular focus on carbon. And then there's rhetoric about the other things, Syngenta website about regenerative agriculture is one of the best I've ever seen until it gets down to the very bottom and said with appropriate use of chemical fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. It's like, this is a small print on the bottom of the website. And so the focus on carbon as, an outcome for farmers is, to me, sort of missing the point. And the point is to restore soil health. That is in the farmer's interest, by the way, of course, in terms of water retention, help plant health, and then whoever eats the plant, people or animals, not killing the pollinators, what a great idea that is, and then not using herbicides, to basically desiccate the crop, whether it's wheat or barley or rapeseed, etc. Most of the glyphosate that's in our baby food, in our children, in breast milk, in dust, in everything is coming from desiccation of paraquat dicamba glyphosate that's used to desiccate crops, because you do get an increased yield if you speed up the ripening of a commodity crop. But, so you can have a practice where you got more carbon in your soil. And by the way, when I harvest it, I'm going to kill, birds, insects, and we just don't know the final result of glyphosate in our bloodstream in almost everybody in the world today. So, that's why I think the focus on carbon itself now as a metric, as something to be fungible, that is to say, hey, we got some over here. Do you want to buy it? Okay. But what's going on? Is it really what we want to accomplish, the carbon itself? Or are we using it really as an accurate measure of an overall change in that farm, in the soil, everything from springtails to, to pollinators, to everything is it's a system, And so I just think that systemic emphasis should go along with carbon metrics in farms, so that there is that validation as opposed to just carbon itself.
I think if you take for granted, and maybe there's disagreement about to what degree carbon in soil is an adequate proxy for other types of ecosystem benefits, and maybe that is a really tight proxy, and maybe it's looser than one might hope. But just doing one thing correctly and measuring one thing successfully is extremely challenging. Also having to take into account something like biodiversity, which measuring that is a whole minefield too, as I'm sure you've seen, water, things like that. And then somehow bundling this into an asset that the average person who buys an offset, even well-informed ESG professionals, are buying junk. And they're mostly just trained to think in terms of a ton is a ton. The duration doesn't really matter. Is an avoidance the same as a removal or sequestration, or however you want to call it? This is not well understood. We've trained people with bad carbon math for a very long time. So introducing increasing complexity here, I think what you're asking for is essentially a spiritual revolution for the planet. And we probably need one.
No,
But
I mean, I agree with everything you just said, so forth, but it's not about measurement. It's about practice. It's praxis. That's what it's about. And okay, are the farms, using neonicotinoids? Okay, you can say, look, if you're using neonics, I'm sorry, we don't care how much carbon you've increased it by, because you have a systemic pesticide that's killing pollinators and birds. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, I mean, so there's things you can do that just like, these are thresholds. You can't measure that, changes in moisture content over the time. I mean, the farmers are going to notice it and measure it and so forth. That's fine. And so that's not something, that's just an outcome. Again, outcome is simply the more life in the soil is going to attract more moisture and retain more moisture. We know that. But that's about practices. Is the land covered? Is there live roots in the land and so forth? And these are checklists. And the farmer can just say yes or no, or I'm working on it. And it's not like you're going to say you're out, but there's some things you can say, look, we do not approve of glyphosate, whether it's in any shape, manner, or form, and so forth. If you're using it, or dicamba or whatever, paraquat, That's it. If you that's it. We're not going to use thank you, but get your money someplace else, but not from Nori. And I think you can do it with neonics and so forth. I think you can do it with that. And I think you can definitely call out in a positive way people who are planting their fence lines, doing prairie strips, whatever, to increase, biodiversity and really, the bringing back, populations of beneficials, whether bird or insects and so forth. So I think you can call that out and say our farm, farmer X in state Y is doing this and so forth. And then you can make it known to the farmers and so forth that these are things we really love to see. Let's be positive about this. These things, come on, you wrinkle your nose on nicotinoids and glyphosate, dicamba, say like, no, thank you. Sell your carbon to somebody else. We're not going to be part of that because that's just industrial agriculture in drag, in disguise, and it is not actually truly regenerative.
If you think agribusiness is just terrible for the planet in general, changing some of those practices could be some of the highest impact things one could do. Do you not think so?
Give me an example.
I think even moving from conventional ag to regenerative light, if you compare it to a permaculturalist living on an acre, there's no comparison to row cropping in the Corn Belt. It's almost a different thing entirely by kind. But surely moving agribusiness towards more regenerative-esque practices is a good thing. And you are seeing companies move in. It's probably some of it's camouflage, some of it is sincere, some of it's driven by bottom line and not some sort of spiritual connection to the earth. Well, I think on net, it probably is good.
Yeah, I don't use the word use the second time you use spiritual. It's like I think everybody has a spiritual life, whether they know it or not, and so honor that. I don't use that as a.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tell me how you would say it, then I'll gladly adopt
Well,
it.
spiritual sounds like amorphous, and I'm actually very, very hands-on, down to earth, practical and pragmatic, in my discussion.
Yeah.
Look, this is what I suggest, and I'm doing it for two of the biggest food companies in the world. So I know, which is what I think you need to do is say, look, these are the principles, and they're regenerative. These are principles, and this is what these principles mean. Okay, practice is wherever you're starting, wherever you are right now. You have 5,000 acres in Iowa and corn, and you live in a toxic environment, and you can't even drink your own well water. Okay, that's where you are, but this is where we need to go. And each farmer, she or he, is going to have to figure out whether they want to, first of all, and then how to get there. It's not like if you're doing this, you're X'd out. It's not binary. It's actually a process. As I say, it's a flow. And so practices that, say, would typify, what Gabe Brown and others do, and so forth, which are kind of like, the rock stars of regenerative agriculture, and they're all over the place. And I used them when I started Erewhon in the 60s. I was working with regenerative farmers, okay? But they were there then, and they're here now in more so. And you're seeing this movement. For Nori, I just feel like it's saying, like, this is where we want to go. We want to work with you and by the way, we can get you money for measurable changes in carbon and so forth. And who knows, at some point, maybe you can get foundations or family funds or others, maybe ESG companies, to even pay more if people are doing, prairie strips and, hedgerows and fence line planning and other practices, and forsaking all form of herbicide, of having live roots in the soil, of not just having cover crops, but always having cover on the land so the land never sees the sun, and which is preventing erosion and feeding the crops. And you get somebody goes to in-farm fertility, well, that's going to be hit the bell. But the point being is that you're really putting out there what Nori is about, the commitment it has, the direction it wants to go, and you're there as a partner to farmers, to help them, to be, a cheerleader. But in the meantime, here's some extra income, by the way, for practices that do increase carbon in the soil and so forth. I hope that's helpful to you in terms of continuing this journey to make your farm less toxic, if not non-toxic, more productive, that you make more money, you save money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what you hear from every regenerative farmer is they're more profitable, without exception. The ones who, getting there, that canyon, or that from where they are, being squeezed by prices and commodity companies and so forth, and getting to that regen side is difficult, because, they're all addicted to practices that they can't get out of easily.
Appreciate the advice, and I'll be sure to share it. I'd also like to ask for advice. Many of our listeners are in the carbon removal community. Many people are doing enhanced rock weathering, ocean alkalinity enhancement, direct air capture. That is a space that we roll in quite frequently. And we are anticipating that the costs will come down. Cost curves will come down as they have in other spaces like solar. The grid's going to clean up. It's going to change the equation here. Hopefully nuclear fusion comes online. God, please don't take the bait on that one, though, because that's going to derail the entire rest of the conversation. But what advice would you have for them? Do you think they should stop trying to make more engineered carbon removal solutions even work?
Enhanced weathering and all those stuff are all part of natural processes. Okay, so
it's sort of like a hybrid is often what people
thumbs
say
up
around here.
Thumbs up to all that, no question about it. And that is an acceleration of a natural process. So hey, can we get in here? Can we help? Can we get the stuff, and we'll spread it around either on the land or on coastal areas. No question. When you get to direct air capture, I would challenge one physicist anywhere in the world to show me where Moore's law applies to direct air capture. It won't. It can't. And that's different, in looking at things where, there is going to be economies of scale developed over time because of the fact is there's more customers, the customers are closer to source, there's techniques and so forth. I can see that happening and being very, very valuable in terms of carbon removal. I still wouldn't use the term removal. I just feel like you're not removing carbon, you're just changing where it is. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm an English major, so I find words important, because I feel like people say, oh, it's gone. No, it's not. It's actually, which you made a very good point about. It's actually where it came from. So it's bringing carbon back home. It's a very different way of speaking about it than removing it and so forth. So that's why I take a little bit of exception to the term, because it's actually inaccurate. But when it comes to direct air capture and bundling it in with other solutions, I say, well, you show me the Moore's law here, because it's about basically fluid dynamics. 4 parts per 10,000. We're going to bring it down into something, and you can't change the cost on that very much. You can change the energetic cost, that is how much energy is required. You can change the source of energy, for sure. It could be nuclear, it can be, coal, it could be renewables, etc. Okay, but now you're going to liquefy it. Show me the Moore's law of liquefaction from the absorbance. I'm all ears. I would love to see the breakthrough. Now that you've liquefied it, show me the Moore's law of pumping liquids into depleted oil wells, which is what Occidental Pete's going to do, or in pipelines that go who knows how far away into geological formations. Like there is no such thing as a Moore's law in these areas. And so that's why I say DAC is, to me, it's a dead end. It's a financial dead end. Mm-hmm. And all the belief in the world is not going to change the physicality of that. In other words, that's just physics, So that's why I do draw a line. Yeah.
I'm going to get so many emails for this episode, which is good. That's engagement. So that's good for its own sake, I think. Are there other types of carbon sequestration that you think are financial or otherwise dead ends?
Dead ends? I think more in terms of possibility instead of dead ends. I'm not here to call things out. I'm here to think about what's possible. I think about Inventwood, which is a company in Maryland, and basically invented by Chinese scientist, Liang Binghu, who got his PhD in nanotechnology when he was 20 at UCLA, and then went to Stanford for his postdoc, and then went to University of Maryland and had 10 years of RPE grants. And the grants were to transform wood into a substance, invent wood. He calls it metal wood, METTLE as well, metal wood, that basically is 2 times stronger than steel, uh, 1/6 the weight and 1/2 the cost, and doesn't burn. Now, to me, that is using nature because it's pure wood, and there's a process of removing the lignin and the hemicellulose and some of the cellulose, and then compressing it under heat. Okay. And I wish I had it in my desk. I could show you a piece. But the point being is that can replace steel. You can make I-beams out of it. You could make a Tesla out of it. You can make paneling out. You can, whatever wood is used for, and metal and aluminum for that matter, you can use invent wood. And the DOE just gave it, or granted, I think $20 or $25 million to build the first factory, which is being built in North Carolina. See, that to me is what I'm focusing on, is possibility, not, I will call out things which I think you got to be kidding people. And it's, for me, Ross, I do the math. It's about math. It's not about belief. I mean, we said when we did Drawdown, in God we trust. All others bring data. Okay, so that's my thing about direct air capture. Bring me the data on Moore's law here. No one's using that term, but they're invoking it. They're implying that it's there somehow. This can get down to $200 or $100 or whatever a ton. And I'm saying, I'm all ears. But I want to see the data, not the belief. But so I think about things that are actually making a huge difference in the world, and using the principles of biology or the the living world as a way to reimagine our relationship to it. And going regenerative agriculture is simply a reimagination of our relationship between producing food and then feeding the world as well. Now, right now we're feeding people. It's arguable how the quality of the food, but let's put that aside for a minute. But we're not feeding the earth. And that an agricultural system that actually feeds the mother, which is the earth, which is, is going to be one that endures, that produces better food. And we know now that the food that comes out of really rich, healthy soils is a rich, healthy plant that has more phytochemicals in it and is far more nourishing for whether it's children, goats, or people. I mean, the fact is we know that. I mean, this is happening at the Rockefeller Institute. And there's 10,000 ingredients in broccoli, not 17, not 42, 10,000 different ones. We have no idea actually what's in our food and how that relates to our microbiome, but we do know that we go to a farming system that creates very healthy, vibrant soil, which is a whole mystery in itself, down below. I mean, we was like, well, what's going on? We really don't know, but we do know healthy soil. And the plants that come out of it are going to be far different in terms of levels and types of nutrients that we haven't even understood or measured yet. And so this is a win-win-win-win-win thing. And yeah, it's going to be very difficult for farmers to make that transition. We get that. And that's why I love what you're doing, because like, can we help? That's what you're doing. It's not about a business. Of course it's a business, but I mean, it's about, can we help? Can we be helpful? But I think the most helpful thing you can do is to really, provide a sensibility to the farmer, she or her or him or whatever it is, family, wherever they are, about the possibilities that lie ahead if they wish, if they can, if they maybe just take 500 acres over here if they have a huge farm, or 100 acres, and just try things out and see how it works, and experiment. Don't do anything that's going to threaten your livelihood or your income stream, but step by step.
That's a nice thing. I appreciate the kind words, and you may get your wish, by the way. I know some very thoughtful direct air capture people, so you may receive some of this data that you're looking for. Whether or not you buy it, it's a different kind of question here. Paul, I'm really grateful for you being here. You have a lot of resources on your website too. I imagine you'd like to drive people to your website, books. Is there anything you'd like people to do to engage with you?
Well, the website regeneration.org has solutions, many of which were not in Drawdown. But what's interesting is that what I wanted to do is combine the solution with a sense of agency. So when you look at a solution, it's really about what you can do as an individual, as a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a town, a city, as a county, as a province, as a company, as a corporation. And not all of them have things that you can do on those different levels of agency. But what it allows somebody to do is to understand where the points of intervention are to actually enact that solution. And people ask me all the time, what should I do? And I'm going, look at a list like that. And when you find something that lights you up because you want to know more about it, or you've always wanted to do it, or you actually know a lot about it maybe and you want to do it, that's what you should do. Don't do a should, do a want. In other words, I want to do this. It just lights me up, Great, that's what you should do, because it's you, and that's where you're going to be most effective. And so Nexus on regeneration.org is just saying, look, it's like here's a huge buffet of possibility, and is there something there that you want to get involved with, whether you're in 5th grade or whether you're ESG department of a big corporation.
Thanks so much for being here, Paul. I appreciate you being a good sport with all these direct carbon sequestration / removal / am I even allowed to say removal at this point anymore? Probably not. Thanks for having a real conversation about this stuff.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you could please subscribe and give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, that'd be much appreciated. It helps us get our content out to more people. You can sign up for our newsletter at nori.com, follow us on social media, and we will catch you next time.